30 years ago, a young woman was snatched from a payphone, and her presumed murderer has never been found. But now investigators believe that they have a motive for the crime. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you know what to do. Let's get started. Clinton, Missouri is known as a quiet farming town that's typically pretty safe, but that would all change when a young woman was abducted from a phone booth. After a barbecue on April 4th, 1991, Angie Marie Hammond, who was 4 months pregnant at the time, dropped her fiancé Rob Schaefer off at his house and said that she would call him a few hours later. Rob would later say, "That was about 10 o'clock. I was going to meet her back uptown as soon as my mom got home. I was watching my little brother at the time, and she called later on that night." As promised, Angie did make that call to her fiancé Rob. It was around 11:45 p.m., and she was in a phone booth. This phone booth was in a parking lot of a food store, and it was about 7 blocks, give or take, away from her fiancé's home. As the pair are talking, Angie tells Rob, that she's too tired and she really just wants to go home. Remember, she's 4 months pregnant. She had a long day. It's 11:45 p.m. She really just wants to go get in the bathtub and relax. As Angie is talking to Rob, she's aware of something happening around her, but she didn't realize just how sinister it was. As Angie is in the phone booth and she's on the phone with Rob, she's telling him that this man is in his car and it's a truck and he's circling the parking lot. She would tell Rob that he was a filthy, bearded man. She would then tell Rob that he pulled up next to the phone booth, took out a flashlight, and was looking around as if he was looking for something. It seemed like Angie was pretty, unalarmed by the truck circling the parking lot, but once it got to that phone booth and that person took the flashlight out, she suddenly became a little bit nervous. In a later interview, Rob would say he used the phone next to her, got back in his truck, and looked at something with a flashlight. She described the flashlight to me over the phone. He was looking for something. I had her ask him if he needed to use the phone. Maybe the other phone was broken. And he said no, he'd try again in a minute. Then we just talked about other things. We weren't too worried about it. And that's when I heard her scream on the phone. I heard her scream. The only thing that went through my mind was getting up there and finding out what the hell was going on. I just dropped the phone and ran out of the house. I didn't even hang the phone back up and just headed up there. Unfortunately, as Rob is racing to the scene to get to the phone booth to get to his fiance, he passes a truck that's flying by him and somebody yells out the window, "Robbie." Instantly, Rob knew that was Angie. She had been kidnapped, and he makes a quick U-turn and he chases this truck. He would chase this truck for about 2 miles before his car broke down. And I can't imagine the feeling in this poor man's mind. His fiance, who he loves and is the mother of his soon-to-be child, has been kidnapped. And, he makes a U-turn. He's chasing this truck. He thinks, okay, I can get, to Angie. I can save her. And then his car breaks down. I can't imagine the guilt he harbors. He would say that all he saw after that was brake lights and dust. Luckily, Rob was able to give a pretty detailed description of the truck. Rob would state that the truck was a late 1960 or early 1970s green Ford F-150. He did say there's a decal of water or an outdoor scene completely covering the rear window. He said it possibly had a white top and there was damage to its left front fender. And witnesses would report seeing a Caucasian male driving a similar truck near the telephone booth at the time Angie disappeared. And although the man has never been identified, he was wearing coveralls and a dark-colored baseball cap. He had glasses, a beard, and a mustache. Of course, after Angie disappeared, Rob was considered a suspect for quite some time. He was given a polygraph, which he passed, and eventually he was cleared from the suspect list. But soon, investigators would come to believe that they had a serial offender on their hands. They believe that Angie's case may be linked to 2 other Missouri women. Cheryl Ann Kenny was a convenience store worker who disappeared after locking up her store. Trudy Darby was another convenience store worker who was abducted from her workplace on January 19th, 1991, which was about 6 weeks prior to Angie's disappearance. The store was found to be missing $220, and Trudy's body was found in a river 2 days later. She had unfortunately been shot twice in the head with a shotgun, although later 2 brothers would be charged with the robbery, rape, and murder of Trudy Darby. And because Angie just vanished seemingly into thin air, there were unconfirmed sightings of her all over the states. At the time she went missing, she was working at a bank and also attended classes at Central Missouri State University. Having just graduated from high school, she really did have her whole life ahead of her. She was outgoing and well known in her little community. Unfortunately, the leads would dry up, and investigators had no idea what happened to Angie. Although I read about this case many years ago, every time I hear about it or read something new about it, just feels like a punch to the stomach. I can't imagine this poor woman who's, at the phone booth and she kind of notices that something strange is happening, but doesn't pay too much attention to it. She was in a safe town and she felt comfortable. And she's on the phone with her fiance and she's tired and she's 4 months pregnant and she just wants to go home. And as she's talking, somebody snatches her, and her poor fiance on the other line just hears her screaming. And even worse, when he gets to the scene, this truck flies by him, and the last words he hears, his fiance screaming his name. And as he's chasing this person, his car breaks down. It's just utterly devastating. I find it truly tragic that Angie hasn't been found. Technically, I think she'd be considered a missing person because her body hasn't been found, but nobody knows for sure. But now, more than 30 years later, police are releasing a key detail to the case. Investigators would soon believe that a letter that was sent to the police department was directly linked to Angie's case, and perhaps a case of mistaken identity. Investigators believe that an informant's testimony in court, which was a key part of stopping an illegal drug operation, was leaked. This informant would receive this letter, which was basically cut and paste, taking words out of magazines and pasting on a piece of paper, presumably so no handwriting was evident and couldn't be traced back to anybody. The note did address the informant by the number that was given to him to keep his identity a secret. The letter also mentions the informant's estranged wife by her first name. That informant's wife and his daughter, also named Angela, were living in Clinton, Missouri at the same time. That letter was sent on April 4th, 1991, the same night that Angie Hammond was abducted. Investigators do believe that members of a criminal organization took the informant's daughter as payback, or at least they tried. So investigators are kind of coming up with this theory that perhaps after this informant's name was leaked, he was going to testify and kind of had this big drug operation underway. His name was leaked. People in that organization realized and they were going to abduct this informant's daughter, Angie. And apparently she somewhat resembled Angie Hammond. And so perhaps when that man was in his truck and he pulls out a flashlight and he's looking at something, he's looking at a picture. And perhaps he thought the picture that he had resembled the woman in the phone booth enough and abducted her. And maybe at some point they realized their mistake. Even if this was a case of mistaken identity, which does happen, unfortunately nobody's heard anything from Angie for 30 some odd years. Her body has never been discovered. There's just simply no sign of her. But what we do know is a man was brazen enough to abduct a woman from the phone booth as she talked on the phone to her fiance. And perhaps that person is still out there. I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. Was this a case of mistaken identity, or was Angie abducted by a stranger? But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. I'll be back next week with another video, and I'll see you then.